How we doing today, guys and girls? Welcome back to Next Step Solutions. Today I'm going to be building a custom computer for a good friend of mine that lives up in Seattle, Washington. He's one of the last of my buddies that was still on console and finally made the decision to get a computer after a bit of harassment. The main things he wanted was a decent bit of storage, and since he's mainly playing video games, he wanted quicker launch times and less loading screens. He also wanted to have good performance, but not necessarily break the bank, so he didn't want to spend a ton of money on the computer, but had a little bit to spend. And we left some room for upgradability in case he wants to upgrade his GPU or CPU or other components in the future. This build ended up costing around $1,500, but that included the monitor, which is a 1440p monitor from LG. So, without further ado, guys, let's hop straight into it and get to building. Kicking things off, let's get the motherboard unboxed. We went with a B550 Tomahawk from MSI. The Tomahawk has an AM4 socket and an AMD chipset. Supports up to 128 gigs of memory with dual channel DIMM slots for RAM, and even has two M.2 slots built in. We're able to get this board for about $149.99, and I've put a link in the description if you're interested in looking at the other specs on this board directly to MSI's website. For memory, we have two 16 gigabit sticks of G.Skill Ripjaws RAM that we got for $59.99. It's running at 3200 megatransfers per second, and it's got a nice sleek shielding on it, makes it a little bit nicer than your standard sticks. Since the motherboard is dual channel, we're going to plug the two sticks into the second and the fourth DIMM slots for optimal performance. For the CPU, we went with a Ryzen 7 5800X. It's an 8-core, 16-thread processor with a base clock of 3.8 GHz and a max boost clock of 4.7 GHz. It's a 5000 series, so I had to flash the motherboard with the latest BIOS updates for compatibility. And this CPU ended up costing us $174 and then also $27.99 for the CPU fan. For storage, we have a 2TB Samsung SSD for storing data in games, which cost around $110. And for $69.99, we got a 1TB Western Digital M.2 drive. We partitioned out 500 gigabytes for other games and programs that he wanted to run a little bit snappier. The M.2 plugs directly into the motherboard, and the 2TB drive connected to the motherboard via a SATA cable is mounted behind the back plate of the case on the opposite side of the motherboard. Moving to the CPU fan, we went with an AK400 from DeepCooler. So with this cooler, we had to attach the mounting bracket to the motherboard. Once the bracket was screwed down and the thermal paste was applied, it was time to connect the heatsink to the bracket and then the fan to the heatsink. Any AMD processor above a Ryzen 5 3600X, I would strongly recommend not using the stock AMD cooler. In fact, most of their CPUs above the 5600X, they don't even include the stock cooler because of overheating. And from personal experience, I can tell you that a fairly cheap fan like this can make a big difference in the temperatures that you'll see from your CPU when idle or under intense load. Moving to the GPU, we have a Radeon 6800, which cost us around $430. With 16 gigabytes of memory and 4K capability, it was a good pair with the Ryzen 7 at an affordable price. I was debating on getting the 6800 XT, but during the time of this video, it's sitting at double the price of the 6800. So taking all things into account in regards to my buddy's requests, we decided to go with the 6800, which was a good option just for pricing reasons and also performance for what we're looking for. I got the power supply unboxed and got all the components installed in the case and connected to power. Finally, I got Windows installed and everything booted up without issue. Now it's time to get some games installed and see what our PC can do. Knowing what games my buddy likes to play, I went ahead and installed Rocket League and God of War for our testing. Looking at Rocket League, we're getting very high FPS in the 400 to 500 range, which isn't really that crazy considering the game. But one nice thing was playing the game for an hour or so and seeing that the CPU and the GPU weren't overheating. So that had me confident that everything was seated properly and we had good airflow inside of our case. Moving to something a bit more GPU intense, we have God of War. With all settings set to ultra, except for the render distance, which was one below the max, we were getting between 80 and 100 FPS. More consistently in the high 80s and low 90s with some really great visuals. The load times are also extremely quick with that M.2 speed. So the next step is to get this bad boy shipped out and see what he thinks. As always, guys, thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys at the next one.